At 2:17 in the morning after a hospital shift so long it stopped feeling like a single day and started feeling like a blur stitched together by adrenaline and bad coffee. I pulled up to the gate of my own neighborhood and watched a stranger step directly into my headlights like he had decided this was the moment he was going to matter. Yeah, that actually happened. And before I could even put the car in park, he crossed his arms and told me flat and confident, "Residents only. You don't live here." I remember thinking for half a second that I was too tired to be offended. Because when you've been awake for almost 2 days straight, your brain doesn't jump to anger. It just tries to figure out whether reality glitched or not. You know what I mean? I rolled the window down slowly, hands still shaking just a little from everything I'd done hours earlier, and I said, calm, polite, the way you learn to be when you don't want things to escalate. "Man, I live here. Unit 18C. I'm just trying to get home." He didn't move, didn't hesitate. He looked at me the way people look at a stain they don't recognize and said, "Never seen you, and I know who belongs here." That was the moment it clicked that this wasn't security, this wasn't protocol, this was a regular guy with a little bit of power and a lot of certainty about who he thought I was. Now, the part that still messes with me even now is how far apart reality and his assumption were. Because a few hours earlier, I was standing under surgical lights holding pressure on a torn artery with my bare hands, literally keeping a man alive while a team scrambled to get ready. And earlier than that, I'd called time of death on a kid who never even got a chance to finish high school. And somewhere in between, I'd held a woman's hand while she asked me if her husband was going to wake up. And then I drove home in silence, scrubs under a jacket hospital badge clipped to my chest, just wanting to sit in my place and hear nothing for a few hours. And instead, I had this man at the gate of Stonebrook Heights, the quiet, gated community I'd paid into telling me I didn't belong. Stonebrook wasn't luxury, it wasn't flashy, it was just quiet, trimmed hedges, a gate that mostly worked neighbors who waved from a distance, and that was the whole appeal. After chaos all day, silence feels like oxygen. I didn't come from silence. I grew up in a part of Florida people like to forget exists, the kind of neighborhood where streetlights flicker for weeks before anyone fixes them, where your parents work hard and still worry every month. My mom came home smelling like antiseptic every night from her nursing job. My dad took electrical work wherever he could find it, and nobody ever handed us anything. I decided I wanted to be a doctor when I was a kid. The night an ambulance took forever to reach our house, and I watched fear sit on my mother's face like something alive. I didn't know the words back then, but I knew the feeling, powerless. And I promised myself I'd do everything I could to never feel that again. Not for me, not for my family, not for anyone I could help. So I studied like it was survival, because in a way it was scholarships, long nights, saying no to things other kids said yes to, pushing through college, med school, then a trauma residency that breaks people who aren't ready to be broken. 80 hours a week, sometimes more. Days where you forget what day it is. Nights where you go home and replay faces you couldn't save. I learned how to stay calm when everything around me is falling apart, how to speak softly when people are screaming, how to carry grief without letting it crush you. When I finally settled into my career and bought my condo at Stonebrook, it felt earned. 2 bedrooms, second floor, Unit 18C, nothing fancy, just mine. I went through the HOA process like everyone else, got the sticker, the gate code, paid my dues on time every time. I lived there for years. Because trauma surgery doesn't run on a 9 to 5 schedule, I came home late a lot. 2 in the morning, 3 sometimes later. That night was no different except for the man standing in front of my car like he was daring me to argue. I pointed to the sticker on my windshield and said, "Still calm, it's right there." He leaned in, squinted, shrugged, and said, "Stickers can be fake. People try all kinds of stuff." I remember letting out a breath, not angry, just tired, and saying, "Fake, to get into a condo complex at 2 in the morning, for what man to go to sleep?" He didn't laugh. He didn't consider it. He just enjoyed the moment, enjoyed the fact that he was in control of whether I moved or not. Then he said it, the thing people say without realizing how loud it is. He looked at me and said, "You don't look like you live here." And there it was. Not the sticker, not the code, not the paperwork, just a feeling he had about what someone who lives here is supposed to look like. His name was Grant Weller, HOA, president, retired, mid-50s, the kind of guy who treats a volunteer title like a badge. His job was paperwork and lawn rules, but he'd turned himself into the unofficial gatekeeper. And it wasn't just me. I didn't know it yet, but this was a pattern. White residents tailgated through the gate all the time, no problem. But if a black delivery driver showed up, Grant appeared. If a black contractor came to work, Grant had questions. If a black guest arrived, Grant needed proof. People noticed. People talked quietly. But you know how it goes. Nobody wants to be the one who pokes the bear, especially when the bear decides whose trash cans get violations. I asked him one more time to move, told him he wasn't security, and that's when he pulled out his phone like he'd been waiting for it. Fine, he said. We'll do this the right way. And he called 911, loudly, told them he had a trespasser, told them I was refusing to identify myself, said black male in a dark sedan like it was a warning label. I sat there listening, jaw tight, thinking about how easy it is to rewrite a story when you think no one's going to check you. The police showed up about 10 minutes later, lights flashing quietly. I did what I've learned to do in moments like that. Hands visible, voice steady, movement slow. License, registration, address matched, Unit 18C, clean record. One of the officers looked at me again longer this time, then said, "Wait, Dr. Carter." I nodded. He told me I'd operated on his brother after a motorcycle crash the year before, told me I'd saved his life. And just like that, the whole tone changed. The officer turned to Grant and asked him why he'd called 911. Grant stumbled through excuses, said I looked suspicious, said I didn't look like I lived there. The officer stared at him for a long moment and said, "So you blocked a resident from entering his own home." Then he told Grant to move away from the gate. No yelling, no drama, just authority. I drove and parked, turned the car off, and sat there in the dark, not shaking, not crying, just sitting. Because when you spend your days dealing with life and death, you expect trauma at work. You don't expect it at your front door. I didn't call anyone that night. I didn't post anything. I went upstairs, showered, and slept harder than I had in weeks. When I woke up, I realized something important. If I let this go, it would happen again to me or someone else. So I called an attorney. The first thing they asked was whether there was video. There was. The HOA loved cameras, loved security. The footage showed everything. They sent a preservation letter, filed a complaint under federal housing law, and started digging. What they found turned one bad night into a clear pattern. The original sticker approval form for my unit was in the records signed by Grant himself, his signature. The same sticker he'd called fake. Gate logs showed my code had been used hundreds of times over the years, always lining up with hospital shifts. I wasn't new, I wasn't unknown. Then there were Grant's own reports. Dozens of security incidents over his time as HOA president. Every single one involved black people. Not one involved a white resident. Not one. That's not caution, that's bias. And once that pattern was laid out, people started coming forward. A retired teacher who'd been quietly keeping notes because something felt wrong. Other residents who'd been questioned or delayed, it was all there. The HOA's lawyers called before trial. They wanted to settle. The amount was significant, but more important were the terms. Mandatory fair housing training, oversight, Grant removed from the board permanently. He fought it, said he was just protecting the community, said anyone would have done the same. The board didn't buy it. The insurance company covered part of the settlement, then came after Grant for the rest. He didn't have the money. He sold his condo. The man who stood at the gate deciding who belonged had to leave the very place he tried to control. I watched the moving truck from my balcony and felt tired. Not triumphant, not smug, just tired. Because winning doesn't erase what it cost to fight. The story spread. People argued. Some said it was justice. Some said it was too harsh. Some said it wasn't about race at all. But safety doesn't require lying to 911. Safety doesn't require ignoring evidence. Safety doesn't require standing in front of someone's car and telling them they don't belong. That's not safety. That's something else. I kept working, kept coming home late, kept saving lives. I spoke once at a community forum and said the truth as simply as I could. When someone comes into my operating room bleeding, I don't ask if they belong. I just work. And then I asked people to imagine what it feels like when someone decides you don't belong before you even speak. The room went quiet, because everyone understood. This wasn't about one man. It was about systems that give small power to people without accountability and the quiet harm that creates. So here's what I want to ask you, and I really want you to think about it. Do you think Grant was just being careful, or do you think he decided my story the moment he saw me? If you were in my place, exhausted after doing everything right, would you have stayed calm, or would you have snapped? And have you ever been told you didn't belong somewhere that was yours? Your building, your job, your neighborhood. Tell me what happened. Let's talk about it. Because the more we say these things out loud, the harder it gets for the next guy to stand at a gate and decide who deserves to go home.